Close your eyes. Picture your childhood bookshelf. Can you see them? The worn spines, the dog-eared pages. Stories that felt like home. But what if I told you those stories were never meant to comfort you? What if the bedtime stories that shaped your childhood were written in blood, born from trauma, designed to terrify? What if everything you remember is a lie? We live in an age of gentle parenting, of trigger warnings and content advisories, where even cartoon villains receive redemption arcs. But once upon a time, and not so very long ago, children's literature served a different master. Not comfort, terror. Let me show you what's been hidden from you. Before the Brothers Grimm, before stories were softened and censored, before we learned to protect children from the truth, there was Charles Perrault, France, 1697. The court of Louis XIV, infamous for its sexual scandals and courtly intrigue. Perrault publishes tales of past times, and among them, Little Red Riding Hood. You know the story. A girl in a red hood visits her grandmother, meets the wolf. There's a chase. A woodsman saves them. Everyone lives. That's the Brothers Grimm version from 1812. Perrault's original, 115 years earlier, has no rescue, no salvation, no second chances. In Perrault's version, the wolf catches Red Riding Hood on the forest path. She tells him where she's going. He runs ahead. When he reaches the grandmother's cottage, he eats the old woman whole. Then he climbs into her bed and waits. Little Red arrives, knocks on the door, but here's where it gets disturbing. The wolf tells her to undress, to take off her clothes, and to climb into bed with him. She does. And there, in the original manuscript illustration, preserved in the Morgan Library, you can see it. A young woman in a bed, wearing only her red cap, gazing up at the wolf who lies atop her. She doesn't look afraid. She looks intimate. After the wolf devours her, Perrault ends the story with what he calls a moral. But it's not a moral, it's a warning. He writes, "Children, especially attractive, well-bred young ladies, should never talk to strangers." I say wolf, but there are various kinds of wolves. There are also those who are charming, quiet, polite, unassuming, who pursue young women at home and in the streets. And unfortunately, it is these gentle wolves who are the most dangerous ones of all. This wasn't a fairy tale. It was a cautionary tale about sexual predators, written for the court of Louis XIV, where young women were routinely exploited by powerful men. The Red Hood wasn't magical. It was a symbol: menstrual blood, sexual maturity, the transition from girl to woman. The forest path wasn't just a forest path. It was every dark alley, every dangerous shortcut, every place where young women are told not to go alone. But the wolf was never an animal. When the Brothers Grimm sanitized Perrault's version in 1812, they added the woodsman. They removed the undressing. They transformed a story about sexual violence into one about obedience. But they knew what they were doing. In their notes, they called Perrault's version too cruel, too sexual, too tragic. What they meant was too honest. Because the original folktales, the ones told by mothers to daughters in French and Italian villages, were even darker. In those versions, the wolf forces Little Red to eat her grandmother's flesh, to drink her blood. Only then does she realize what she's consuming. These weren't bedtime stories. They were survival manuals. And when we sanitized them, when we added the happy ending, we stopped teaching girls how to recognize predators. We started teaching them to wait for rescue. And sometimes it's too late. Everyone knows Dumbo, the little elephant with big ears who learns to fly. The Disney classic that made generations cry over a lullaby sung through prison bars. But what if I told you that Dumbo's story, this story we think of as pure, innocent, heartwarming, is built on the corpse of a real elephant? An elephant who was orphaned, enslaved, beaten, and fed alcohol until he died under the wheels of a train. Africa, 1860. A baby elephant watches poachers slaughter his mother. He's captured, chained, transported. By 1865, he arrives at the London Zoo, barely alive. His keepers describe him as having eyes nearly eaten out by disease, feet literally rotten, skin covered with sores like leprosy. They name him Jumbo, from the Swahili words for hello and chief. For 17 years, he gives rides to children, carries them on his back day after day. Queen Victoria's children ride him. Theodore Roosevelt rides him, and also thousands of children. But Jumbo is suffering. Violent outbursts, aggression, destruction of his enclosure. To control him, his handler, Matthew Scott, starts giving him alcohol, beer, whiskey, champagne, booze-soaked biscuits. Over time, Jumbo becomes an alcoholic. In 1882, the great showman P.T. Barnum, the man from The Greatest Showman, the musical where everything is beautiful and dreams come true, buys Jumbo for his circus. The British public is outraged. 100,000 school children write letters begging Queen Victoria to keep Jumbo in England. She refuses. Jumbo is shipped to America. 10,000 spectators filled New York streets to see him arrive. He becomes the biggest celebrity in the world. Barnum markets him as the biggest elephant in the world, exaggerating his height by 2 feet. For 3 years, Jumbo performs, trapped in a cage on a circus train. No other elephants, no space to roam. Plied with alcohol to keep him docile. St. Thomas, Ontario, Canada. After a circus performance, workers are loading Jumbo back onto the train. Another train comes down the tracks, unscheduled, speeding. Some say Jumbo froze on the tracks. Others say he was trying to protect a smaller elephant. Some believe he simply just gave up. The train hits him at full speed. It takes him 30 minutes to die. He was 24 years old. African elephants typically live 60 to 70 years. Barnum had Jumbo's hide stuffed and toured it for years. His skeleton went to the American Museum of Natural History, where it sits in storage to this day. New York, 1939. A woman named Helen Aberson writes a story for a new invention called a roll-a-book, a prototype where illustrations scroll past like a moving picture. The story is about a baby elephant with oversized ears who's mocked and separated from his mother. His name, Little Jumbo. When other elephants bully him, they paint over the J in his name and replace it with a D. They taunt him by calling him Dumbo. Aberson's son later revealed that the story was deeply personal. Helen had lived a difficult life herself, struggled with adversity, with rejection, with being seen as different. The bullying Dumbo experiences wasn't fantasy, it was memory. But here's what makes this truly dark. While Disney transformed Aberson's story into one of triumph, where Dumbo becomes a star and reunites with his mother, the real Jumbo never flew. He never escaped. He died alone, in agony, crushed under steel wheels. Remember the scene in Disney's Dumbo where he and Timothy the mouse accidentally drink champagne-spiked water? Where they hallucinate pink elephants dancing? That scene seemed bizarre and random. A weird acid trip in a children's movie. It wasn't random. It was Jumbo's truth. The real elephant, sedated with alcohol, hallucinating. Suffering, unable to escape the prison of performance. When you watch Dumbo now, when you hear Baby Mine, that heartbreaking lullaby where mother and son reach for each other through bars, remember? This isn't a happy story that turned sad. It's a tragedy that Disney tried to turn into a happy story. And somewhere, preserved in formaldehyde and museum storage, the real Jumbo's body still exists. A reminder that not every story about flying elephants has a happy ending. Germany, 1812. Two brothers, Jacob and Wilhelm Grimm, published a collection they called Children's and Household Tales. You know these stories. You grew up with them, but you don't know them at all. The story you were told, Two children survive by outwitting a witch. They escape. They live happily ever after. But the real story goes like this. Two children are abandoned in the forest to starve because their parents cannot feed them. This wasn't a fairy tale. It was lived experience. In the early 1300s, Europe faced the Great Famine, 7 years of failed harvests, of desperate hunger. Historical records confirm it. The elderly starved themselves to save the young. Parents abandoned children they couldn't feed. And yes, cannibalism happened. But here's what's been erased from your Disney version. In the original tale published in 1812, it wasn't a wicked stepmother who convinced the father to abandon his children. It was their mother, their real, biological mother. The Brothers Grimm later changed this detail, unable to accept that a true mother would do such a thing. The version they collected understood what hunger does. It makes monsters of us all. In the version you know, Snow White is a teenager. Beautiful. Almost a woman. In the original Grimm tale, she is 7 years old when the huntsman takes her into the forest with orders to return with her liver and lungs. That ending, you recall? The kiss, the true love, that was never part of the story. In the original, the prince falls in love with Snow White's corpse. He demands to take her glass coffin back to his castle so he can stare at her dead body. Only when his servants trip while carrying the coffin does the poisoned apple dislodge from her throat. The queen's punishment is even more disturbing. At Snow White's wedding, the wicked queen is forced to wear red-hot iron shoes and dance until she drops dead. You know the Disney version with the fairy godmother, the pumpkin coach, and the glass slipper. But in the Brothers Grimm version, the one published in 1812, there is no fairy godmother. There is only a dead mother's grave and a tree that grows from her bones. In the Grimm version, Cinderella doesn't just lose her mother. She watches her die. The evil stepsisters try to fool the prince. But do you remember how they try to fool him? The first sister cuts off her own toes to make the slipper fit. Blood fills the glass shoe. The second sister slices off her heel. Again, blood betrays her. And their punishment at Cinderella's wedding. Doves, those symbols of peace, peck out their eyes. Both are blinded permanently. This is what the Grimms gave to children. Not lessons in kindness, but lessons in vengeance. The Grimms collected this tale from German peasants who lived in a world where women's worth was determined by marriage. In an age where deception kept you alive. The stepsisters aren't villains for being ugly or mean. They're villains for being willing to mutilate themselves to destroy their own bodies for social advancement. The message was, authenticity matters. Deception will be discovered. And the punishment for lying about who you are is blindness to truth itself. When Disney removed the blood, the mutilation, the blinding, they removed the entire moral of the story. Here's what makes the Brothers Grimm truly disturbing. With each new edition, they didn't make the stories gentler. They made them more violent. Wilhelm Grimm, the primary editor, systematically amplified the brutality. He removed most sexual content. And yes, there was sexual content, but replaced it with graphic violence. In The Robber Bridegroom, bandits force a maiden to drink wine until her heart literally bursts. Then tear off her clothes and hack her body into pieces. In The Juniper Tree, a woman decapitates her stepson, chops up his body, cooks him in a stew, and serves him to her husband. He asks for seconds. Why this escalation of violence? Because the Grimms understood something we've forgotten. Children in the 19th century lived in a world of casual cruelty, of infant mortality and childhood disease, of poverty and hunger. These stories weren't meant to traumatize children. They were meant to prepare them for a world that would show no mercy. The question is, what does it say about us that we had to sanitize them? Everyone knows Pinocchio. the wooden puppet who wants to become a real boy, the one whose nose grows when he lies. The Disney version is lighthearted and charming, a celebration of truth and transformation. Carlo Collodi's original is something else entirely. Florence, Italy, 1881. Carlo Collodi, a journalist, a satirist, begins publishing a serial called The Story of a Puppet in a children's magazine. For 4 months, young readers follow Pinocchio's adventures. He's not cute. He's not lovable. Collodi describes him as a rascal, an imp, a confirmed rogue. Then, in the 15th chapter, Pinocchio is captured by 2 assassins, the fox and the cat. They string him up from a tree and hang him by the neck until he's dead. And there, Collodi ended the story. A children's tale, ending with a child's murder. The public outcry was immediate. Parents and children demanded he bring Pinocchio back. The publisher pressured him. Finally, months later, Collodi relented, but the compromise was brutal. Pinocchio would live, but his suffering would be endless. To understand why Collodi wrote such darkness, you must understand where he came from. Carlo Collodi was born in 1826 on a narrow street in Florence that received no sunlight ever. He was the oldest of 10 children. Only 4 survived to adulthood. In a single 4-month period in 1838, 4 of Carlo's younger siblings died. From 4 months to 6 years old, it's taken one after another. The surviving Pinocchio reflects this childhood of death. The puppet is beaten, imprisoned, hanged, starved, has his legs burned off, and crucially, he murders the talking cricket with a hammer when the cricket tries to offer him guidance. Pinocchio doesn't learn to be good through love. He learns through relentless, escalating punishment. But Collodi's work, it's not just about childhood trauma. It's political satire aimed at children. Post-unification, Italy was a disaster. Poverty, corruption, broken promises. Collodi, a political journalist, was disgusted by it all. So he made Pinocchio a mirror. The fox and cat represent politicians who exploit the naive. The field of miracles where money supposedly grows is mocking get-rich-quick schemes and magical thinking. Even Geppetto isn't just a kind old man. He's the Italian working poor, so desperate he sells his only coat to buy his son a schoolbook. Pinocchio immediately sells it for a puppet show. This is Collodi holding up a mirror to Italian society and saying, "Look at yourselves. Look at what you do to your children." Disney turned this into a story about wishing on stars. The real Pinocchio never wished for anything except survival. For decades, people have whispered that Alice's Adventures in Wonderland was written on drugs. That Lewis Carroll was high when he created the caterpillar. When he made Alice shrink and grow, and when he painted playing cards red. The truth is more disturbing than that myth. Lewis Carroll wasn't on drugs. He was escaping madness. His real name was Charles Lutwidge Dodgson, a mathematics lecturer at Oxford. Socially awkward, obsessed with logic and order, and suffering from a neurological condition that caused terrifying hallucinations. Sensations of his body growing enormous or shrinking impossibly small, of spaces warping around him, of time distorting. Today, we call this Alice in Wonderland syndrome. On July 4, 1862, Dodgson took a boat trip with the Little family to entertain 10-year-old Alice Liddell and her sisters. He improvised a story about a girl who falls down a rabbit hole. That's the official version. The one about a summer afternoon and a spontaneous tale. But read the book closely. Under the playful surface lies something dark. Alice's Adventures in Wonderland is a story about a child trapped in a world where size and proportion are meaningless. Identity is fluid and unstable. Adults are criminally insane. Death is threatened constantly. Logic has collapsed entirely. The Queen of Hearts screams off with their heads dozens of times. The Cheshire Cat discusses beheadings casually. The mock turtle exists in a state of permanent grief. Carol wasn't writing about drug trips. He was writing about the Victorian world through a child's eyes, and that world was insane. This was an era when 5 out of 6 families used opium habitually. Infant mortality was rampant. Children worked in factories and mines. Laudanum was sold in every pharmacy without prescription. Madness was treated with isolation and restraint. Carol's genius wasn't in creating a fantasy world. It was in revealing how fantastical, how nightmarish the real world already was. And there's another layer. Carol was a mathematician, losing his grip on certainty. The 1860s saw mathematics undergo a revolution. Non-Euclidean geometry proved that parallel lines could meet. New algebraic systems challenged the rules of basic arithmetic. The foundations of logic were crumbling. For a man who'd spent his life believing in absolute truth, this was existential horror. Alice in Wonderland is that horror made into a story. Every nonsense riddle, every impossible rule, every mad character screaming contradictions, it's Carol's mind fragmenting. The caterpillar asks, "Who are you?" And Alice can't answer. Neither could Carol. Peter Pan holds a special place in popular culture. The boy who never grows up. It's the magical world of Neverland. Childhood preserved forever. But J.M. Barrie's story wasn't about preserving childhood. It was about immortalizing death. Scotland, 1867. 2 days before his 14th birthday, James Barrie's older brother David goes ice skating. He collides with another skater, falls, fractures his skull, and dies. 6-year-old James watches his mother fall into grief so complete, so consuming, that she effectively loses her mind. She becomes obsessed with the boy who would never age, who would remain forever young, forever 13. James tries desperately to fill the void. He dresses in David's clothes. He imitates his voice. His mother once turned to him and said, "Is that you?" And James, heartbroken, replied, "No, it's not him, it's just me." That moment, that rejection, is where Peter Pan was born. Read the first chapter of Barrie's 1911 novel carefully. Mrs. Darling remembers a Peter Pan who is said to live with the fairies. There were odd stories about him, as that when children died, he went part of the way with them, so that they should not be frightened. Peter Pan is a psychopomp, a guide for the souls of dead children. Neverland is not a place children go to avoid growing up. It's where they go when they die young. In 1897, Barrie met the Davies family in Kensington Gardens. 5 boys, George, Jack, Peter, Michael, and Nico, became his obsession. He cultivated a relationship with their mother, Sylvia. When she died of cancer in 1910, Barrie altered her will to make himself their legal guardian. What happened next is disputed. Biographers describe it variously as protective friendship or psychological abuse. What's undeniable? George died in World War I at age 21. Michael drowned at age 20 in what may have been suicide. Peter committed suicide in 1960 by throwing himself under a train. Their cousin Daphne du Maurier sealed her diaries for 50 years after her death, calling their contents dangerous to Barrie. D.H. Lawrence once wrote, "J.M. Barrie has a fatal touch for those he loves. They die." In Barrie's original version of the play, Peter Pan wasn't a hero. He was described as a demon boy who kidnapped children from their beds in the dead of night. Captain Hook wasn't even in the first version. He was added later for purely practical reasons. The stage crew needed time to change sets. The real villain was always Peter, because Peter Pan isn't about the joy of eternal youth. It's about the horror of never changing, never growing, never moving beyond childhood trauma. Peter is trapped, not in Neverland, but in the moment before death. In Disney's version, Ariel gets her prince. True love conquers all. She becomes human, and they live happily ever after. Hans Christian Andersen's version is not a love story. It's a suicide note. Copenhagen, 1837. Hans Christian Andersen publishes The Little Mermaid. The plot seems familiar at first. A mermaid rescues a drowning prince, falls in love, seeks out a sea witch to become human. But then, the sea witch doesn't just take the mermaid's voice. She cuts out her tongue with a knife, while the mermaid is conscious. The legs she receives feel like walking on knives with every single step. Not metaphorically, literally, every step is agony. And the prince, he never loves her. He treats her like a pet, a curiosity. He lets her sleep at the foot of his bed like a dog and calls her his little foundling. When he marries someone else, the mermaid is given a choice: kill the prince and return to the sea as a mermaid, or die and dissolve into sea foam. She chooses death. Why did Andersen write this tragedy? It's because he lived it. In 1836, Andersen confessed his love to a man named Edvard Collin. Andersen was bisexual in an era when such feelings were criminal, when same-sex love was considered both sin and sickness. Collin rejected him, then announced his engagement to a woman. Scholars now believe The Little Mermaid was Andersen's love letter, his way of processing the pain of loving someone who could never love him back. Someone who existed in a world where Andersen could never belong. After the mermaid's death, Andersen added something strange. Instead of simply dissolving into sea foam, she becomes a daughter of the air. A spirit who can earn an immortal soul through 300 years of good deeds. Critics hated this ending. They felt it was a cop-out, a forced happy ending, but it's actually more disturbing, because Andersen added a final twist. When the spirits find a child who is good, obedient, and brings joy to their parents, God shortens their 300-year trial by 1 year. When they encounter a naughty or ill-behaved child, the spirits weep in sorrow. For every tear they shed, 1 day is added to their time of probation. Andersen was literally telling children, your misbehavior prolongs the suffering of dead spirits. Even in the afterlife, there is no escape from pain. Winnie-the-Pooh seems like the gentlest story on this list. A silly old bear. 100-acre wood. Friends having adventures. But what if I told you that every character is a symptom? That the 100-acre wood is the inside of a traumatized mind? That Winnie-the-Pooh is a children's book about PTSD? July 1916. The Battle of the Somme. The bloodiest battle in human history. A. Milne, a signals officer in the Royal Warwickshire Regiment, barely survives. He returns home with what was then called shell shock, what we now know as severe post-traumatic stress disorder. The buzzing of bees sends him diving for cover. He thinks they're bullets whizzing past his head. Popping balloons make him scream and hide. He hears artillery fire. At home, his young son Christopher Robin witnesses his father's terror. He doesn't understand. How do you explain war to a 6-year-old? You don't explain it. You encode it into a story about a bear. In 1920, Milne and his son visit the London Zoo. They bond over a Canadian black bear named Winnipeg, who is shy, reclusive, and traumatized. Milne sees himself in that bear. He buys his son a teddy and begins writing. Every character in Winnie-the-Pooh represents a different aspect of post-traumatic stress. Pooh is dissociation, the obsessive search for honey, the forgetfulness, the inability to focus, classic dissociative symptoms, the mind escaping into simple, repetitive comfort. Eeyore is depression, constant negativity, self-criticism, the sense that nothing will ever get better. Thanks for noticing me. Piglet is anxiety and hypervigilance, always worried, always anticipating danger, always on edge. Tigger is hyperactivity and impulsiveness, the inability to control oneself, the reckless behavior that comes from a dysregulated nervous system. Rabbit is perfectionism born from trauma, the desperate need for control and order because chaos feels life-threatening. Owl is memory problems. He can't spell, can't remember things correctly. Classic trauma response. Conga and Roo are overprotection. The mother who can never let her child out of sight because danger feels omnipresent. And Winnie? He's Milne himself. The guide through the landscape of a father's damaged mind. One of the most famous Winnie-the-Pooh illustrations shows Pooh floating with a balloon, trying to reach honey in a tree. The caption reads, "The bees are getting suspicious." It seems whimsical, charming. But remember, for Milne, the sound of bees triggered flashbacks to bullets tearing past his head on the Western Front. The 100-acre wood isn't an escape from trauma. It's trauma made bearable. It's just small enough for a child to understand. Christopher Robin Milne later wrote that he hated being the character in his father's books. That he was trapped by a fame he never asked for. That the real Christopher could never live up to the perfect child in the stories. The books that helped his father process trauma became Christopher's own source of it. Sometimes the monsters we survive become the stories we tell our children. And sometimes our children become trapped in those stories forever. The Little Prince is beloved worldwide. A story about love, friendship, responsibility. About seeing with the heart instead of the eyes. But its author wrote it while in exile, knowing he would likely die before the war ended. And he was right. December 1935, Antoine de Saint-Exupéry and his navigator crash in the Sahara Desert during an air race. No water, no food, no radio. For 4 days, they wander the dunes, hallucinating. On the second day, they stop sweating. Their bodies are so dehydrated that nothing remains. On the fourth day, a Bedouin on a camel finds them, administers a traditional rehydration treatment, saves their lives. Years later, exiled in New York during World War II, unable to fly, unable to fight, Saint-Exupéry writes about a pilot who crashes in the desert, who meets a strange little boy with golden hair, the Little Prince. But the story is layered with grief. The Little Prince's rose, demanding, difficult, beautiful, is modeled after Saint-Exupéry's wife Consuelo. Their marriage was tempestuous. He fled it again and again. The book is his apology. The prince's reassurance that his body is just an empty shell echoes the last words of Saint-Exupéry's younger brother, Francois, who died at the age of 15. "Don't worry, I am not afraid," he said. What about the baobab trees that threaten to destroy planets? Scholars believe they represent the Nazi regime, spreading and consuming everything. And the snake that bites the little prince at the end, that's death. Willing, chosen. The little prince doesn't return to his planet. He dies in the desert. Saint-Exupéry published The Little Prince in 1943. By then, he'd rejoined the Free French Air Force. Despite being 43 years old, in constant pain from previous crashes, and barely able to turn his head. On July 31, 1944, he took off from Corsica on a reconnaissance mission. His plane never returned. For decades, his disappearance remained a mystery. In 1998, his identity bracelet was found in the Mediterranean. In 2000, his wrecked plane was discovered. But there's no evidence of enemy fire. No bullet holes. No damage that would indicate he was shot down. Some believe he ran out of oxygen. Others think mechanical failure. But many, including those who knew him, believe he chose not to come back. That July morning, flying over the Mediterranean, he discovered his own asteroid, his own return. In the book, the narrator says, "In one of the stars, I shall be living. In one of them, I shall be laughing. And so it will be as if all the stars were laughing when you look at the sky at night." Saint-Exupéry never saw The Little Prince published in France. He died before liberation. But somewhere, above the Mediterranean, perhaps he's still flying. In 1962, America is embracing childhood innocence. Mr. Rogers hasn't aired yet, but he will. Sesame Street is coming. We're learning to protect children, to make their world safe and magical. And then, Anita Fiegels publishes a children's book called The Tooth Fairy. It should be sweet. An explanation for where teeth go when they disappear under pillows. Instead, it's something else entirely. Something deeply, profoundly disturbing. This tooth fairy doesn't just quietly leave coins and vanish into the night. She's obsessed, consumed, compulsive. She collects teeth constantly. She works harder than Santa, harder than the Easter Bunny, because children lose teeth every single day. And when she gets those teeth home, she organizes them into boxes and jars neatly categorized. Boys' teeth, girls' teeth, top teeth, bottom teeth, extras. She displays them as decorations. The inside of her fishbowl is lined with teeth. Her kitchen shelves have jars full of teeth. The path to her house is paved with teeth. She also makes jewelry from teeth. Garlands of teeth hang outside her home like Christmas lights. When she has parties for other fairies, she gives them teeth as gifts. They play games with teeth. Every surface, every corner, every aspect of her life revolves around hoarding children's body parts. But here's where it becomes psychological horror. Only at the end do we learn why the Tooth Fairy is so obsessed with teeth. Why she hoards them, treasures them, and cannot let them go. She doesn't have any teeth of her own. She's toothless. And so she hoards the teeth of children, surrounding herself with what she can never have, what she's been denied. What makes her fundamentally different from everyone else? This is not a cute story about a magical fairy. It's a story about pathological hoarding born from deprivation. About filling the void of what you lack by obsessively collecting what others discard. It's about how trauma of being born without something essential creates a psychological need that can never be satisfied. Fiegels came up with the idea after overhearing a conversation between her young daughters. She thought it would be fun to explain what the Tooth Fairy does with all those teeth. But what she created, perhaps unconsciously, was something much darker. A portrait of compulsion, of hoarding disorder. A creature so driven by her void that she has built her entire life around what she doesn't have. Children who read this book remember it decades later. Not fondly and not nostalgically. They remember it as creepy. Because even as kids, they could sense something was wrong. That making jewelry from teeth, paving walkways with teeth, giving teeth as gifts, that's not charming. That's disturbing. And the fact that it was presented as normal, as innocent, as sweet, that made it worse. Here's what's fascinating. This book was published in 1962 America, an era obsessed with normalcy, with wholesomeness, with protecting children. And yet, somehow, a story about compulsive hoarding of children's body parts by a toothless creature was deemed acceptable. Published, distributed in schools. Because we've always had a strange relationship with what we tell children. We sanitize violence, no blood in Disney movies. But we normalize psychological horror and call it imagination. We remove death from fairy tales. But we give children a figure who decorates her home with their discarded bones. The Tooth Fairy might not kill anyone, but she's just as disturbing as any monster in folklore. And now you know what she's really doing with those teeth. Before we had gentle parenting guides and positive reinforcement, Victorian Europe had something else. Books designed to terrify children into obedience. Frankfurt, 1845. Dr. Heinrich Hoffmann, a psychiatrist, wants to buy his 3-year-old son a Christmas present. He goes to bookstores looking for a children's book. He finds nothing but dry moral lessons. Boring, preachy, ineffective. So he writes his own and illustrates it himself. He calls it Struwwell Peter, Shock-Headed Peter. Within weeks, it becomes a bestseller. Within years, it's translated into 35 languages. What made it so popular? It didn't lecture children. It showed them what would happen if they disobeyed. In graphic, horrifying detail. The story of Little Suck-a-Thumb. A boy named Conrad is warned not to suck his thumb. His mother leaves. The moment she's gone, he puts his thumb in his mouth. The door bursts open. A tall man with enormous scissors appears. Snip, snap, snip. He cuts off both thumbs. The illustration shows Conrad screaming, blood pouring, his severed thumbs on the ground. The very sad tale with the matches. A girl named Pauline is told not to play with matches. She disobeys. She catches fire, burns completely to ashes. All that remains is a pile of ash and her shoes. Only her cats mourn her. The story of the Inky Boys. 3 boys tease a dark-skinned boy. Nicolaus, a giant man who appears from nowhere, dips them in black ink as punishment. The lesson is anti-racist, but being black is still treated as a punishment. The story of Augustus who would not eat his soup. Augustus refuses to eat soup for 5 days. On the 5th day, he dies of starvation. The illustration shows him wasting away, day by day, until he's a skeleton. We look at these stories now with horror. Child abuse, trauma, terrorism masquerading as education. But Victorian parents loved them. Why? Because Victorian children died all the time. From ordinary things, playing with fire actually did kill children. Houses were made of wood, lit by candles and oil lamps. Refusing to eat could mean starvation. Food was scarce, illness common. Going outside in storms actually did result in children dying from exposure. The dangers weren't exaggerated. They were real. Hoffman wasn't trying to traumatize children. He was trying to keep them alive. So what have we learned? That Charles Perrault wrote about sexual predators disguised as gentlemen wolves. That the Brothers Grimm collected stories born from famine and poverty. That Pinocchio was written by a man who watched his siblings die one by one. That Peter Pan guides dead children to the afterlife, created by a man obsessed with a brother who never aged. That the Little Mermaid chose death over living without her voice, metaphor for forbidden love. Dumbo's story is built on the broken body of a real elephant, orphaned, enslaved, and fed alcohol until he died under train wheels. The Tooth Fairy hoards children's teeth because she has none of her own, a portrait of compulsion born from deprivation. And Victorian children were raised on severed thumbs and burned girls, and the omnipresent threat of violent death. But here's the pattern beneath it all. These stories were never written to comfort children. They were written by damaged adults trying to survive their own childhoods. Child psychologists have a term for this: inoculation. Small doses of fear, delivered safely through story, help children process real-world danger. Fairy tales with monsters teach children that monsters can be defeated. Stories with death teach children that death exists, but life continues. Stories with punishment teach children that actions have consequences. But there's a difference between inoculation and infection, between helpful fear and traumatic terror. And that line has moved dramatically over the past 200 years. When Disney turned these stories into animated musicals, something was gained. Children could access these narratives without nightmares. Parents could share them without guilt. But something was also lost. We lost the understanding that childhood is not innocent. That children experience fear, anger, grief, confusion, all the darkness adults feel. By sanitizing our stories, we tell children that their feelings are not acceptable, their fears are not real, and their anger is not allowed. We teach them to hide. And what we hide eventually devours us. They didn't write dark stories to hurt children. They wrote dark stories because childhood is already dark. And the greatest kindness we can offer is not protection from that darkness, but a lantern to help them navigate it. Because all the best stories are true.